for sure. Hey guys, how you guys doing? My name's Simoni Lawrence. I've been with the Tiger Cats for about 8 years, and I'm super passionate about mental health. I've been playing for Tiger Cats for 8 years, so your mental health better be ready playing for these guys for 8 years on all the roller coasters we've been on. So I'm super passionate. I'm just here to help any way that I can. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you. And Rodrigo, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Madison. Hi, everyone. I'm Rodrigo Narro Pérez, and I'm a postdoc here and instructor at Mac, teaching a variety of courses, and also really thankful to be here and share this panel with two amazing athletes, which I'm sure I'll learn a lot because sports and me don't get along too well. So it's an interesting, I hope to learn a lot and see what kind of conversation we can all come up with.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for introducing yourself. I'm going to be passing the webinar off to Zeinab and Patrick to be moderating. So thank you again for everyone for attending.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madison. So I just wanted to preface our entire discussion today by sort of dissecting the name that we chose for the event. So it's called Real Men Talk, Entering the Discomfort Zone. So speaking about feelings and emotions is often difficult for men. And it's especially so for men because of the traditional views of masculinity that have been pushed onto us through the things that we experience, the communities that we're a part of, and the things that we look at through media these days. So asking for help that doesn't manifest itself physically can often be seen as being weak. So having these discussions and challenging our understanding of what it means to be a man can often be uncomfortable. So the first question I would like to touch upon today and pose to each of our panelists is, in spite of this discomfort, what brought you here? Why is the topic of men's mental health something that's very important to you? And maybe how does your identity as an athlete or as an academic influence that? So Dane, would you be interested in starting that off?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, to me, I think it's kind of a two-part question, right? So why I was interested in getting to jump into this with you guys is because I am an athlete. We play in a great city with great fans, and not just fans that are physically sitting in the seats on game day or whatever, but people that follow you on social media, people that keep up with you here in this part of your life. And I think that just I can offer just kind of everybody who thinks athletes are people that don't have these issues as well, that don't go through funks and peaks and valleys just like everybody else. I just want to be able to show that, you know, I'm just a normal dude too, right? Like I like doing things like everybody else does. We all struggle with the same things. And yeah, that's kind of what led me to join in on this, and really just getting to do it with one of my teammates who I've always admired and respected, Simoni. You know, I admire him, and I'm just excited to be here and talk about these issues.
Yeah, I feel like to echo off of QB1, I mean, we're put in a blessed position where like what we say like matters and stuff, and like to put out a good message for everyone. And for me, it's personal just because it's like there's like always a big facade around like athletes. Everybody puts us at like some pedestal and stuff, but like the truth is like we're regular people and we go through like the same things as most people. It's just we have to deal with it and adapt right away. And just to echo off of Dane, just here and excited to help everybody any way that we can.
Thank you for that. I think it's great that you recognize, you know, being role models. Rodrigo, I see you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to add as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm coming from a different perspective here, but for me, sort of being an instructor here at Mac, I get to see a lot of the, you know, the struggles that a lot of our students here have, which are not uncommon as we, you know, we're in a society right now where a lot of things are happening all the time. And on top of that, you have a lot of familial pressures. And one of the things that I have noticed is that oftentimes a lot of the students that come up to me are often women or women identifying students, and it's not a lot of the men who come and are kind of honest about their problems. So seeing that, you know, it's just anecdotal data. I don't have true data on that, but I always wonder, you know, it seems that men are either not off, like, you know, I wouldn't say that they're not experiencing things. They experience quite a lot, but it's either just don't see them actually coming up and being transparent and doing things so we can work together to ensure that they succeed in the class. And then personally for me, I think I have, I often always say that, when you're a student, you forget that your instructors are people too, and that we do things, right? I think I remember being an undergrad and just assuming that the prof was like, they didn't have a life. They just came in and then all they did was write really hard midterms, but that's not the case as well. And I think, seeing men talk about the different things that you go through, and we all have different experiences here, right? Like, I often I feel that I always admire people who move places when they're adults. So looking at Simoni and Dane, that moving from the US here is like, that takes a lot that I don't think I could do right now. I came from Peru when I was 10 and I could talk about immigration and all those things, knowing no English. But the idea of moving right now as an adult, oh my goodness, that scares me. That terrifies me. Like I couldn't. So I think that has to do a lot with our own, with ourselves, right? Like that's the decision we make for ourselves. So I think that's really exciting. And I look forward to having some of that conversation here as well.
That's like some free game for any of the kids in here that's in college and stuff. What I noticed when I was in college was I used to be nervous, in class, to go talk to the professor and stuff, just because I'm like, all right, I'll handle this. I'll just go talk to my teachers and stuff. But as soon as I got to know my professor, talk to the professor, yo, I'm struggling with this. And they'll be like, man, I used to struggle with the same thing, just schoolwork or anything. Building relationships with people is the most important thing. And that helps your mental health, knowing yo, you're not just viewing somebody in a certain type of light. You're actually looking at that person as a human being, and you guys both understand each other, and it boosts your grades up too.
Absolutely. Asking your prof for help helps with your grades. Who would have thought? And I think you've all touched on this common idea that we see people, whether it's our prof or an athlete or a celebrity or just anyone we look up to, and we kind of make ideas about who they are and the pedestal that they're on and the perfection and the life that they must live. And so it's so important to have these conversations, right? So that we can unpack that and realize no, everyone is a human being, right? And it's okay if you are a human being too. These people you look up to are struggling, and that's okay. So you're struggling, and that's also okay. Which is why we're so happy to have this conversation. So something I wanted to touch on that Rodrigo said was that, it was more like women identifying students who are coming forward and being vulnerable and asking for help or saying, I'm struggling. And that's something that we do want to touch on a lot. But before we go into the depths of why are some people doing it and not, I'm hoping we can take a step back and talk about the concept of vulnerability. It terrifies a lot of people, myself included. I continue to work on this. But something we talk about a lot at the Student Wellness Center is vulnerability and the idea of sharing things that are difficult to share. So before we go into more details, what does vulnerability mean to you guys? What does it look like for you? How does it show up in your life?
Well, if you guys don't, for me, it's just I feel like I'm going to have a lot of football analogies because I've been playing football since I was 8, and it's what I know. So excuse me. So for me, just coming into a locker room, a locker room with a bunch of men that are from all over the country and stuff, and it's just only thing that people respect when you're all together and you guys don't really know each other is if you're being as real as possible. You know what I mean? You have to be real with your teammates, real with your friends, real with your family and stuff. So when we're in that locker room experience, I think that we're all just down to earth and we're real. We're man, you know what? I'm really having some problems with my girl right now, or just anything, you know what I mean? So it's just being vulnerable enough to be I'm not going to act all macho and act like everything's going perfect in my life. It's I'm going to share what I'm going through with my brothers. So if I could help one of them not make a mistake or, keep them on the right path and stuff like that. So I think that's what vulnerability is for myself personally.
Yeah. To kind of just echo that point, to me, it took me a long time. Really the first time I had to deal with anything like this was in college. And it was always talking to a group of guys or talking to my friends or just talking to random people. I always knew that the conversation or whoever was talking was about to get vulnerable, because there's always I don't want to say like an awkward silence, or there's always like a pause. And like, if you're the one that's bringing it up, you can feel your heart rate get a little higher. Your heart starts beating a little faster. And to me, I think that's when I realized like, hey, look, this is more than just like, you know, kind of just a locker room conversation, right? Like now we're actually talking about some real stuff. And for the longest time, I would just, when that situation would happen, I would kind of just like divert the conversation, right? Like it was weird to me. But now I've learned that there's so much growth and there's so much opportunity to learn about people and to grow with people in that space. And to me, that's what vulnerability looks like, especially for like athletes like me and Simoni. But I mean, that happens in everyday life too, right? In any conversation.
Yeah, no, one of the things I think Dane and Simoni talked about, you know, being there's a feeling, you know, like sometimes like I say, like there's a physiological feeling, like your body tells you when you're being vulnerable. So I think sometimes we just got to listen to our bodies. But one of the things that I've learned in the last little bit, and particularly when dealing with students and dealing in some of my work, vulnerability has to go both ways, which is like being honest, so how you speak and how you communicate being vulnerable, but also listening vulnerably. Like, how do you listen and you're vulnerable? And I think that means necessarily, one, listening without any type of bias or misconception. So you're just listening to them. You're not like, you know, you listen that they are a person, that you don't know what they're going through. Even if they're telling you, there are so many things that they may not have. So listening vulnerably allows you to actually have a true connection. And I think that's something that a lot of us don't know, right? Because listening vulnerably actually means that you are open to what that person might hear you, even if you sometimes disagree, or even if you sometimes are like, you know what, this is not an issue. And I think sometimes if we're listening to our friends, sometimes we're like, why are you worried about it? But maybe it's an issue for them. It might not be an issue for you, but it's an issue for them. So I think those are things that I think about in relation to vulnerability. If you are the person who is providing that kind of support, you have to be open to it as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much for all of you for sharing. Part of what vulnerability means to me, and something that a lot of people don't think about, is being, as men, being vulnerable with ourselves as well. And that comes along with allowing ourselves to feel feelings and not suppress them and hold them with us. Because once we suppress and hold these feelings, it feels as if the only appropriate things that we can express are anger, frustration, aggression. These are like common themes and motifs amongst male behavior in popular culture today. So if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with ourselves, to confront uncomfortable feelings, that's how they can pass. And I know Zeinab likes to preach this in all her talks. The great thing about emotions is that they do pass, but they can only pass as if we allow ourselves to feel them. And that's what part of vulnerability means to me. So thank you all for sharing your understanding of what it means to be vulnerable. Now, just taking a deeper look at this, in each of your respective communities, professions, different experiences that you've gone to, what do you see as the largest barriers to being vulnerable as a man?
Well, I can start, even just in, being at Mac and instructor, or with any type of industry. One of the things that I find whenever I talk to other men about being vulnerable is this idea that if you do become vulnerable, people are going to either perceive you completely different, or you have this perception yourself that opportunities are going to be taken away from you, because they're like, well, you know what, he just opened up, so he can't deal with this, or he can't take it, right? So this idea that all the things that you have access to from other people are now going to be taken away when you've been vulnerable, right? So for example, here at Mac, they're like, if I talk to colleagues and I'm having an issue or whatever, I always think, oh, okay, so then the next time something comes up, they're going to be like, Rodrigo can't do it, or don't bring him in because he's overwhelmed, right? So this idea of vulnerability, I think we have this perception that I think it is societal, right? Because I do think I have heard that of, in particular, with some colleagues who perhaps may be older, where, when people talk about vulnerability, whether they're men or women or non-binary, if you're vulnerable, it's this idea that you can't take it, right? Like you cannot take the pressure anymore. but everyone has different ways to cope with it, right? So for me, is being around my friends, like being around my family, like I like going out. I like to just not think about things and just enjoy my Saturday. So like, those are things that I think work for everyone. But there's this perception that if you open, things are going to be taken away, right? So like maybe if I'm vulnerable next time, I won't get an invitation to be in the panel because they're like, you know what, Rodrigo's weak. Or next time an opportunity comes out for a job, they're like, he was under pressure last month. If this is more responsibility, he's not going to be able to handle it. So I think there's that misperception, but I have seen it in practice, right? When people are in hiring committees, when people are deciding things, they pit it against you sometimes, right? So I think there's both this inner perception of things that might be taken away, but in reality, sometimes they are. So how do you put those two together? So I'll let Simoni or Dane talk about that.
That's really good, Rodrigo, because and it's a fact, mental health is something that it has to do with your brain, and that's how we operate in life. We all have me and Dane, we have high performance jobs, you know what I mean? So it's is his mental okay? And that's why I think this is such a awesome event, because Dane's one of the best QBs in the league, you know what I mean? And he's out here yo, it's okay to be vulnerable. And, I've had my own issues with mental health for a while. And, I just keep being defensive player of the year. So I'm it's not going to take, I'm just here to show you can be going through problems and stuff, but it's not going to take away from your work, especially if you're handling it the right way. I have a sports doctor, Dr. Carla, that I talk to all the time, just to stay on the right path, to stay focused on what I need to focus on. And it's it's where when you try to shell it and cover it up your own way, whether that's running around partying or doing things that mess up your mental health even more. If you go through the proper channels of using what you have available, that helps you not only deal with the problems off the field, but it clears your mind so you can focus in your job or on the field.
Yeah, I agree exactly what they're both saying. And this is why I think this topic is so awesome, because there's such a wide range of every question that has been asked could be answered with a million different ways, and none of them are wrong. It's all the right way to do it. And I think the biggest thing to me, as I was listening to everybody speak, is sometimes it is kind of what Rodrigo was saying. It is uncomfortable to bring up to somebody because you do know what the possible repercussions could be of if I have a problem and I come up to Simoni and it kind of rubs Simoni the wrong way, or it's just uncomfortable. It definitely could be something where it's the next time I just don't get that text to come hang out or something, and that very well could happen. But usually when you talk to the right person and you can just feel we were talking about earlier, that physical connection, you become you two people grow with each other through it, and then you can look at each other as wow, we went through that together. I respect that person. I understand that person a lot more. And I just think there's a lot of beauty that can come from it. And it's not an easy conversation to have. But the first time that you finally find the right person to talk to about it, I think it helps both of you grow as the speaker and as the listener, kind of what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding someone who can receive your vulnerability is also so important, right? Because it's scary to share emotions, and all of you mentioned, not knowing how you might be judged or what people will assume about what you can handle just because you're expressing your feelings when others might be feeling it too, but they're just not sharing it. So we assume they can handle them more. So a lot of really great points already touched on in the first little bit of this panel. Something I want to dive a little bit deeper on is something that Simoni said a bit earlier on about how when you were in that locker room, you're talking about being vulnerable and saying, I'm not going to put on an act of being macho right now. I'm going to try to be vulnerable, right? I'm going to just be yeah, I'm having this struggle or that struggle. And I want to talk about that concept of an act, right? Oftentimes we feel we have to put on an act, right? For whatever reasons, whether it's to be manly or to be strong or to be seen as whatever. So I'm wondering if you all can talk about that theme of what are some times when you were you felt you had to put on an act, or when did you start allowing yourself to put down that act?
So I just go back to from childhood. So it started early with me. I would always go around kids that like I shouldn't have been around and stuff like that. And I would go hang out with them and my cousins and stuff, and then just act like I'm like the most toughest guy in the world. But it's like everybody know you put it on that act. Like you got real guys that are like really tough guys and stuff, and you coming around just talking. And then the best thing was that everybody always says, like where I'm from, is you don't have to lie to kick it. You know what I mean? So it's like, just be yourself, be your authentic self. And whoever messes with you off of that, like whoever appreciates you and evaluates you, like those are people forever where you can like really offload or like, you know, help have that person in your life as a forever thing. And you don't want those fair weather like fans that really can't, you know, be a friend to you. Like that's not even something that you want to deal with in life. So like it's a good way to weed out your friends as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I would say too, is like, especially being an athlete, we deal with this a lot, right? Like when something's going great and you're just everybody's telling you how great you are, especially being a quarterback, right? So like, say I have a good game, I'm the best player in the world, right? That's all everybody's going to tell me, right? Say the next week, you don't have as good a game. Well, now I'm starting to feel like I might be looking for a job somewhere, you know? So it's just like, with all that ebb and flow, high and low, the best way to just stay rooted in it is to just be yourself. And like Simoni said, people are going to see like through when you're like putting on an act and stuff like that. So to me, it's just like, I'm not a very good actor, so I might as well just be myself anyways, you know?
I will say, I mean, it really depends. I would in your career or things that you're positioned, because I think in many ways we are different people around the people that we are in. So within my friend space or people that, you know, I've stayed in touch. Well, no, actually, they're like my best friends. I see them every other week, and like from high school, right? So like we've been friends for like, oh God, like 16 years. So they know me inside and out. So there's this idea of, you know, like Dane said, they're going to notice if something's wrong. But I also feel like in the workspace where you have to be much more quote unquote professional, there's a dynamic there. And particularly when you're with like your supervisors or where you're with people who there might be an opportunity in the future. And you're like, ooh, I have to, you know, you have to impress, right? I don't want to say an act, but like, you know, if there's a possibility of moving up, you know, you sort of have to navigate those things, right? And then like when I'm with my mom is my mom, so she can read, she knows something's wrong before I know something's wrong. So that's separate. But I think there's this idea that in the professional sphere, we're always kind of alert, right? Like there's always something to be cognizant of. And I don't know if I've mastered that. I will say I don't, right? Like if I'm here, you know, for those that McMaster who may know, there's a structure of how things go, right? Like, you know, you have your department chair, the dean, the provost. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh my God, and I'm being honest, right? I'm not going to tell the provost my issues because then she could literally make my career or break it, right? Like, which I don't even have, like, you know, as a young scholar, don't have a, you know, permanent job. So why would I do that? And I just wouldn't. If I have some mentors, maybe, but I think there's those realities, and particularly when, you know, that depends on whether I get to pay rent at the end of the month, right? It's not so much where it's my friend's sphere or the people that I'm comfortable with. I think those are very different things. But when things like money come in, where we're all in maybe, well, not all, but like myself and many other people that I know in my career stage, we're all in precarious position, like a year contract with no benefits, like a 2-year contract with maybe some benefits. So what do? Are you true to yourselves, or do you stick with it so you can pay rent and maybe buy food and sometimes like go out for a beer and not feel guilty? So I think there's many different ways to navigate that, and it's tricky, and I still don't have a way to completely navigate it either.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something that's very like disturbing too, as well, just because in the football industry, like you're like running like a real business, like it's a real business. So it's like, yo, do you want to like call your boss and be like, yo, I don't think I'm fit for it? Like in that sense of that's what he might be looking at and thinking. But I know from myself, like I can't sleep at night if I'm not real. Like I can't, it's hard. Like if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. And I remember one time I was going through it, like, and called my CEO of my football team, was like, man, listen, like, this is what I need. And I feel like a valuable friend is good, but somebody valuable that you work for is even better. You know what I mean? So I feel like if you get in a vulnerable situation with them and it's like, does this person even care about me that I'm working for? Like, who wants to work with somebody that doesn't care about you? You know what I mean? So I feel like I go to, you got to navigate your challenges. Like, everybody don't go hit your CEO up. That's crazy. But like, find somebody that you trust in like the workforce and like, just be like, say what's on your mind, because you never know. Somebody's always going through the same thing in this world. And somebody be like, yes, I'm glad you said that. Now you got like 5 people on the same page as you. Now all the workers can push the same agenda that you want to do. So it's like, it's tricky, but like, just go with your heart, because you always know what you want.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, both Rodrigo and Simoni. I think you bring up such great points about like being supported in the workplace, right? When someone, like is responsible for you, whether or not you have a job or whether or not your career can grow, what that adds so many layers to being authentic and being vulnerable. And it can make such a difference when our workplaces are places where we can be vulnerable, because we have a supervisor who models vulnerability and says it's okay to be imperfect or to be struggling, right? Like that makes such a huge impact. I know that we strive to create that kind of work environment within the Student Wellness Center. Patrick, I don't know how successful we are. You can talk about how successful I am as a supervisor. But it makes such a material difference, right? When our workplaces are places where we have to put on, like you talked about, Rodrigo, like almost like a performance, right? Like when I'm giving a talk or like this, like it's kind of like I'm performing, right? I'm not an actor or anything like that, but it is like you have to have like a certain level of certain way of moving about that can make it really hard to be vulnerable if you want to like move forward in your career, because of those considerations of what will they assume about me? Will they not let me do this, that, and that if they know that I struggle sometimes, right? And I think those are really, really salient conversations.
Right. And sorry, I don't mean to cut anybody off, but to me, just, I've been wanting to say it for a second and it keeps coming up in my mind, is like, if that, if you're vulnerable with someone and they end up, not really respecting you and not listening to you, then to me, it's almost like a blessing in disguise, right? Like if that does happen, it would not be a great thing, right? Like everyone would feel terrible, but you're going to learn right there, like what type of person they are and what type of person you have just become and what you're growing to. And it's only going to lead you to that next part of life, which is where you're going to flourish. And I'm a true believer in that. And I think that's where you can really like grow a lot.
What's common amongst all of you is that you've gone through the process of post-secondary education, university, whether it be as student athletes or as Rodrigo progressing through undergrad, grad school, and now being a member of instruction. So I was just wondering, how do you find that experience generally for you? You can tell us a little bit about, your time back in university. So Rodrigo, do you want to start with that one? You're first starting off at Mac.
Sure. Well, I've been at Mac almost for, oh my goodness, I don't want to tell myself. So since I started undergrad, it was 2010, and I kind of never left. I also fell in love with Hamilton, so there's a little bit of both. Been living downtown now for 5 years. But I think, one of the things that I had to struggle with before even that is that back home. So I was born in Peru, in Latin America. Most children, you don't move out until you're like go get married. all my cousins back home, like you only move out once you're like married. Right? So like everyone's who's single or even like dating, you're still at home, right? So there's like a cultural shift that my mom and we all had to struggle with. Like, I'm going to go to residence, and that means being alone, and this idea that quote unquote are like I was being independent, and then like all my aunts and uncles were like, why are you letting him go? Like, that's not right. Like, he should be at home taking care of like the family and all these things, even though you're 18. So there's a lot of different expectations from moving out and being independent at 18. So it was kind of an interesting thing that me and my family had to navigate with. But throughout there, I had a pretty, what I would say, like normal like experience. Like, I was in the sciences, so I just really tried, a lot of work, a lot of lab work. I did realize that when you're off high school, you think you're like quote unquote smart, everything, and then you come to university and then like your grades are not the same as high school, and everyone goes to that kind of like dip in like self-esteem or like, oh my God, am I not smart? What am I doing here? I'm never going to compete. So I think for me, that took some adjusting in first year, that my own expectations and what I was expecting to get were going to be different, and didn't mean that I was less or that I deserved less or that I was, smarter, or like especially being an immigrant, I was like, oh my God, my grades are not going to be the same. I've let my parents down. I left my family down, came to this country, and I cannot even like get like an 80. Like, what am I doing? Right. So I think there was a lot of pressures for that. So there was a lot, having friends that were in similar positions was good to be able to talk about that. And then, I eventually graduated. I worked for a year, and then I did my PhD, which this is not a grad school talk, because PhDs are like, oh my God, I wouldn't even, like, with the whole day, I couldn't tell you what doing a PhD does to your mental health. And like, I think the stats now are that 3 in 4 people in grad school have some type of mental health disorder or mental health crisis. So that's a whole other thing. But it was, how I describe it best is like a roller coaster. When the lows were low, when you had lows, they were really low. And when you had highs, they were really high. And I took longer than the 4 years of finishing a PhD. So that was also something that I had to like come up with in terms. So I don't know. I think school is tough on a lot of different things and expectations. And I'll just share that last year I started, taking medication for anxiety and depression. And I had something that I knew I had to I was struggling with, and I only came to terms with it, like, to ask for help, like, early last year. And then I wonder, if I had asked for help, how would my studies have differed, right? Like, would I have taken as long to finish my PhD if I knew I needed professional help? Or how would undergrad have happened? Because I don't think this was just something that came, like, I can blame it on COVID. Like, it was not a COVID thing. Rather, it was something that I was struggling for a long time. So I don't know. With school, I've gotten to know a lot about myself, but I also know there's a lot of different structures that are not really equitable or equal, then don't allow for everyone to really thrive. But we can talk about that another time. I've spoken enough. Simoni, Dane, take it away.
I mean, shoot, I remember when I was back in college, feels like forever ago, but for me, I like use the tools. So I went to a military college. I went to Valley Forge Military Academy, where we have sergeants, lieutenants, and all they're doing is pinging at your mental, pinging at your mental, pinging at your mental. So it's like, for me, I use something called, it's like the buddy system, right? So everything I did, I would find a buddy and like use them as an accountability partner, use each other as an accountability partner. So whether I got like a chemistry class, I'm like, all right, who's the smartest in here and who's the best to look at? So like I would go in there and then like match up with somebody just to hold myself accountable for chemistry. I'm like, all right, cool. Got that for chemistry. And then go to like football, find somebody that's really good in football and then match up with them and keep on that. Somebody that's good at making their bed or whatever they're supposed to do. Because it's just like, with the whole mental health and just as a person, like, it sucks going through something together, whether it's something it's tough going through something by yourself. But like when I feel like you're like, you got like a buddy, like, man, I just got a 79 on that test. It's cool. I just got like a 69. And then it's like, oh crap, like we got to like come together and like get our stuff together. You got to get everything together. So my advice would just like, get a buddy, get somebody accountable that you can hold you accountable and help you and your mental health together going through the process, especially college, because college was like my first time being on my own. And like University of Minnesota was just one of those things I felt like I was on like in Disneyland. It was just so much fun coming from a military school. So it's like you have to have certain things to keep you on track and stay focused so you don't mess up your mental health, because I feel like a lot of times it's like people are like, oh, like, my mental's good, but like you can actually mess your mental health up by trying to do too much and be all over the place. And like, that's another thing that a lot of people don't talk about, is like just being like able to keep your mental health in a safe space and not let everybody get access to your mind and stuff like that.
Yeah, the only thing I had to add is just, kind of my little personal spin on it, but it's going to be very similar to like what Simoni and Rodrigo just said. I ended up going to the only school that thought I was decent enough to play sports at it, and that was the University of Tulsa. If anybody knows anything about the University of Tulsa, it's always in the top 50 business schools in the world. And so like I grew up in a town that had maybe 2,000 people in it. And so I thought I was like the coolest guy ever. Like I was the first person ever in my town, I thought, to go to college, and then when I get to college, just boom, I got humbled real quick, right? Like I thought I would just walk in there and do what I did in high school, and it did not happen. And much like Rodrigo and Simoni said, what worked for me was finding accountability partners, but also using the resources that Tulsa had available for us. And then it was things like study hall, therapy sessions, things like that I could go in, talk to someone, and go learn to be vulnerable and learn to listen, much like what we were talking about earlier. And once I kind of did that, that's when my college experience became a lot better. I saw that my grades were becoming a lot better. And also on the football field, I was becoming a lot better. And I think they go hand in hand together.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think that a lot of the audience can find what you shared relatable too. So just moving on to the next part of the panel, we just wanted to understand a little bit more about each of your own stories with your mental health, a time that maybe you struggled, and what you're able to do in response, and to find help from there.
So I can start really quick. I battled with mental health, but like I didn't really know I was battling with mental health because I was always raised like, yo, it's just life, you know what I mean? Just keep pushing and all of that stuff. And like, I got immigrant parents from West Africa, and it's like, yo, if we can come here and start a new family and get degrees and handle our business, it should be a cakewalk for you type thing, you know what I mean? So I was always raised like, yo, like just push through everything and everything will be fine. But, I started really like noticing myself to struggle in 2018, and I started talking to like health coaches and stuff like that. And then it was working, and then I stopped. And then 2019, I was struggling. I just went through a nasty breakup with a girl for the 10 years. Those girls get your heart, man. And like, it was a tough one. So like for me in 2019, I was struggling, so I was like talking to doctors and stuff, or like just trying to stay focused on the football, keep the task and like try not to like self-destruct. Cause I was like, all right, I'm gonna just go out party, because you got unlimited resources to go party and do whatever just to feel like, you're getting over something, but you're also destroying your mental health as well. And I'm like, oh, everything's going good because work's still going great. We're like 15-3 or whatever at the time. We're on our way to another Grey Cup. I just got defensive player of the year. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm handling it the right way, just doing everything I'm supposed to do. And, I started slacking a lot and not like just drinking a lot, going out and partying way too much. And like, it was just after the season, it all just hit me. I was like, boom. It just felt like a whole lot on my mind. Just felt like, and I'm just like, start doubting myself and stuff. And like, in reality, I was so out of touch with reality that like, reality is like, we just were running up for the Grey Cups. You just got defensive player of the year. You're just about to get a new contract, but it was still like, nah, this isn't right. Just because, you kind of like feel it. Like, I'm like, man, I gotta get some kind of help. Like I gotta get like way professional help, So I definitely leaned on Dr. Carla. She's like real important in like my life and my family and stuff like that. And it was like, all right, I'm ready. And then COVID hit 2020. I was like, boom, oh, snap. So now this is another wheel. Like I haven't missed a football season. I missed one football season since I was 9 years old. So like, that's like all my body's accustomed to it. No. So I'm like, yo, what's going on? So, but the best thing about that was like, we had a bunch of people, Dane could tell you, like we had a bunch of people going through the same thing. So we're all posted up in the Call of Duty snap, like, you think we're going to play? You think we're going to play? And then it's like, nobody's talking about like Call of Duty. We're all like on our mental, like, yo, what's up with our job? What's up with our life? We got a lot going on. Like this pays our bills and everything like that. So that was also tough. And it was like, man, we're missing a year of football and everybody knows the window of football is short. And I started doubting myself some more. And, I had a lot of talks with people, and it was like, I did not train as hard as I usually train in like previous seasons before the 2021 season. I did so much like mental work, whether it was like going to a retreat, learning more about myself, handling my mind, learning how to deal with things that come my way and all that stuff. And I was like, man, I got to camp and I was like, man, I feel good mentally. I mean, I was a little tired at first and stuff, but it was like, wow, I was so excited that I took the time to get my mental stronger. And, you know, I think it was perfect for the kind of season we had. It was like an up and hill season and stuff. And we still made it to the Grey Cup, not to toot my own horn, but I still got Defensive Player of the Year again. So, but like, it's just like, you like, as long as you take care of yourself, like that's the most important thing. And yeah, like that's my journey with mental health. And it's not something that's like, boom, it's cured. Like it doesn't work like that. You know, it's ongoing. It's ongoing. You got to keep working. Don't quit on it neither, especially when you feel real good. Like whenever I feel real good, that's when I get a doctor on the phone like, hey, what's up? Like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, that's when you're acceptable to things. But, you know, it's something that it's a journey that's it's worth taking. Like if you're thinking about like talking to somebody, man, go talk to them, because like it helps you not only academically, physically, mentally, and it's just a clear mind is such like a good feeling. So yeah, that's my journey.
I think you mentioned something super important there, Simoni. It is a lifelong journey. I think people are like, okay, once I've dealt with X, Y, and Z, once I've gotten over this issue or start, you know, having a healthier pattern to deal with whatever in a better mental state, then I'm good. Then I'm done. Then it's smooth sailing for the rest of my life and I'm going to be thriving. And it's not the case, right? Like you could be doing well and then a pandemic hits. You could be doing well and then, you know, like you go through a breakup. You could be doing well and then like and then just for no like visible reason, like things could just happen, right? So it's so important to like maintain that and keep that going, and be intentional about maintaining our wellness. So thank you for bringing that perspective to us. Dane, I think you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add?
I was just gonna jump on about the journey thing. Is like that is the biggest thing, right? It's not like a destination trip where you get there and you find, like you said, you don't just arrive and that's it. Like I never think about it again. It's a journey for a reason, right? Like there's going to be lows, but also there's going to be highs. And I think it's ultimately worth going on, right? And I think that, like Simoni said, once you can get a clear mind, just everything just around you is so much better. You just feel a lot better about things. And I think that's, you know, we should intend to live that way. So, but like, I guess since I'm talking, I'll do my talk about mental health. And honestly, in college, had to deal with it. Kind of what I was alluding to earlier, coming from a really small town and going to a big university, not the biggest university, but bigger than my town. Didn't really know how to deal with it except for, you know, ganging up with people and getting some really good friends that were also going through it and were in similar spaces as me. And it went great. I met my wife there. I have some really good lifelong friends that, you know, I still see all the time, and everything was going good. We moved to California for the off season when we weren't playing up here in Canada. And then boom, COVID hit and the lockdown hit and, you know, the pandemic and all that stuff. And like, it really, in the US, it really depended where you were living, right? Like if I was living in Texas or Florida, like the lockdown was like 6 days long, right? But we were living in Southern California, like Orange County, which is where my wife is from. And the lockdown was like 3 months, like legit. Like I can remember going to the grocery store and nothing was on the shelves, like not even the spices. And when you don't see spices on the shelves, it's like, you know, like everything's gone. And it was like that for 3 months. And me and my wife were just talking about it yesterday when we were talking about this, but it was the first 2 weeks, best time of our life. We thought it was awesome. I can remember we pulled like the mattress off the bed, put it in the living room. Like we built a big old fort. Like we were just big kids with it, right? Like having a great time. And then a month went by and 2 months went by and we hadn't seen anybody really or heard from anybody. And we just felt super like isolated. And then like Simoni was talking about, the CFL comes out and says, we're not playing in 2020. And that's all I had known, right? Like we're wired that way. Like you work for 6 months and then you train for 6 months to work for 6 months. And then you train for 6 more months. And when that didn't happen, I didn't really know how to react to it. And honestly, if it wasn't for my wife, Nikki, I don't know what I really would have done. She's like, we're talking about the buddy system, but she's like my ultimate like buddy through everything, you know, and just talk through conversations with her. and talking to some of the guys that I went to school with that were also happened to be living in California, dealing with that same thing. That's really what got me through COVID. And then as soon as we were able to come up here and do a football season, to me, everything just felt back to normal again. So I guess in a sense, like my teammates and my friends are kind of like my therapy session. And like, I just feel super comfortable with them and being able to soundboard stuff off of them. So that's kind of my little splurge on it.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of great things about like having someone to go through it with, right? Having your partner there, because it was a lot when it was first happening, and we'll chat a bit more about the pandemic. Hopefully, if we have time. There's so many wonderful things you all are saying that I want to pick up on, but you keep saying more things that are so great. So we're just kind of trying to go with the flow. Rodrigo, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to?
Yeah, I will just add that I think for me, there's a lot of things that coming back, from Latin America, for those who may or may not know, like there's such a thing called machismo, macho, like you're a macho man, like a Latin man, that mental health was not really talked about. So I never had those examples coming back home, or even every time well, before COVID, I used to go back home quite a bit because of work, but it's sort of like a family thing where we're pretty open about it, but it's interesting. Like my dad got diagnosed with ADHD at 58. And that's something that it's a condition that starts since childhood, right? So he lived for 50 years with something without being treated. So there's a lot to unpack there. But one of the things that, I will say is he has his medications. He's open about, it's very funny. Like he has medication in his like little nightstand. And so we know he's taking it, but he's never talked to me or my sister about it. But it's open there, so he doesn't hide the fact that he needs to take medication, but he doesn't talk about it because he's the man of the house. And that's how his dad kind of raised him, right? So it's interesting. So there's this like openness, but it's not really, is it open if we don't talk about it, right? So seeing that, for example, kind of impacted in the ways in which I sought help. Right. Like, so now I have medication that I need to take for anxiety and all those things. But I only got, oh my God, how old am I? 2 years, 1 year ago. So like, I only started taking that a year ago. Right. So it's sort of, there's a lot of things that I think sometimes can be cultural, right? Like mental health in Latin America or even in Latinx households here. Like you just don't talk about it, right? Like you don't have this idea, or like pray to God, right? Like God will show you the way. And I'm like, God doesn't provide the medicine, right? Like I have to go in and use my insurance, go to Shoppers, and that's where, like, so I think there's different ways in which I think we all have to struggle and look at it. So I don't blame my dad for not talking about it, right? Because that's a cultural thing, right? Like that's something that he took from his dad. And I'm glad now that he's looking for it at 50, well, he's not 58 anymore, but I always find that wild. I'm like, what are the things that he struggled with? Like as with to then and still succeeded, right? Like I look up to him in so many different ways, but what would it have been like if he had the support when you need it, right? Like ADHD is something that nowadays you treat it as a child or an early teen, and he got it at 58. So I think those are different things to consider. So I think it's something that I continue to struggle with, and even with my friend group, we're starting to be more open about it. But I do, for example, I'm not gonna. Like, I know he's not on the call, so I can, but like, I'm like, there's something off, man. Like, I've gotten help. Like, go do it. There's nothing wrong. Like, I love you, man. You're my best friend, but why don't you go out and seek it? And there's like this stubbornness, even though I can tell, right? And I'm like, you don't even have to tell me if you do it, but I hope you go out and just do it, right? And I think that's something that I also struggle with friends who just try to pretend that nothing's wrong, and then but there's only so much you can do, right? Like you can only bring the water to, like the horse to the, that expression that you can't make the horse drink the water, all that. So I think there's quite a bit. Sorry, English expressions I don't know. So Spanish I can tell you some more. But there's sort of like this things that I'm constantly learning and trying to be and get some support. So I'll leave it at that.
You can lead a horse to water.
And
That's the
the
thing.
thing Roger was looking for was you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that's and that gave me remembrance, because that's what my when I was going, like my mom was getting frustrated with me. She's like, if you're gonna keep being all macho and tough, like I could bring you to the water, but I can't make you drink. So like, you know, yeah, that's a real one.
Thank you for sharing that whole anecdote. Rodrigo, you spoke about so many interesting things about, you know, that perspective of being an immigrant and being raised in a culture where, not that it's necessarily like super easy to talk about it here either, but like there's some cultures where there's even more still to work through and stigma and stuff like that. And it's hearing you talk about your dad was really interesting for me, because my dad also was diagnosed, I believe it was with bipolar when he was in his like late 40s, I think. I'm not exactly sure. And I remember though, but he was, and I was surprised by this, he was really eager to tell us about this. He's like, I have this condition and I now take medicine. This is why I used to get angry so much when you were a kid. This is why I didn't know how to handle my emotions. And he was like almost excited to tell us, because it was like he realized, oh my God, I'm not just a terrible person. Like this is why I struggled with some things. And this is why I wasn't able to do the things and be the dad that I wanted to be, that I could have been, that I feel like I should have been, et cetera, et cetera. So we were able to have some interesting conversations when I was still like an early teen or even younger. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, as like a 28-year-old looking back, I'm like, whoa, that was really cool that my dad was able to do that. He was able to just talk to his kids and his wife about that. I realize how big that deal is now, and how not a lot of people do that, right? Like when you talk about your dad's experience. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to delve a little deeper, and both you and Simoni have shared experiences about being an immigrant and how that's impacted you, and coming from an immigrant family. So I'm wondering if either of you might be interested in just delving a little deeper there. And how do you feel like being an immigrant or being from your respective communities, how has that impacted you, and your vulnerability and your mental well-being?
For me, I feel like in other countries, like it's strict. It's like you eat by any means necessary. You know, you don't have time to be weak, or you don't have time to go through anything. You just gotta keep moving no matter what. And like, I mean, I admire my dad so much, because like when it comes to mental toughness, like just being around him gives me the chills, because like he's like a solid, tough dude, you know what I mean? And so I can understand like where he comes from, you know, because like he's one of those guys, like he was a big time politician and stuff, traveled all around the world for the country, and, you know, very high up in ranks. And then a war broke out, and, you know, he was pretty much like had to leave the country because, you know, they were trying to kill him and stuff. And like he came to America, had to start all over. Like first house we moved in was like a project in Philadelphia. And I don't know if you guys know anything about Philadelphia, but like it's Philly, right? So like he handled that like a pro. You know, he was working all kind of odd jobs. And then he just was like, you know what, I'm just gonna handle my business and do what I gotta do. Like now he got a doctoral from University of Penn, which is like a like a Ivy League school. And it was just like, so it's like me coming to him with any of my problems, it's like I don't even feel comfortable, you know what I mean? So it's like, because he's really been through something. I'm like, damn, my girlfriend left me. I'm like, what's up? You know, like, so like, I mean, I can laugh about it all now, but like, that's just what it is. But I'm lucky, I'm blessed to have a compassionate mother that, you know, I could talk to about anything. I talk to her every day. Like, you know, she's like, that's the person you go to, and that's who holding it down, like on my emotional side. But I can like see why, like, you know, it's hard to like bring problems to people, that immigrant parents who like literally like fighting for their lives to get you into a better environment, you know? So yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, there's very similar things, right? Like my parents came here, Simoni, when they were 45, right? So like, I'm not even there to the idea of dropping everything, family and friends, and then starting fresh, right? So I like, what am I complaining about, right? Like I always think about that of what like the bravery took for both of them to come to Canada. And my dad spoke zero English, right? So there's a lot of things to that. But one of the things that maybe just another angle to that, I always think there was like the saying that I heard, and I might just be making it up, so just don't quote me on it, but like there's nothing like crying in your own language, which I mean, like, there's nothing like actually, being able to express your feelings and emotion in the language that you grew up in. So being in Canada, those are some of the things that I know my family and I have struggled with, right? Even like my dad not knowing English in, the better half of our stay here, kind of how could he communicate, right? Like, how do you communicate feelings and emotions that even ourselves don't understand in a language that just not yours? Only recently have my parents been able to contact, like a therapist who speaks Spanish, who's like Latina. So like that kind of has helped a lot. But even here, I know, and I see so many of our international students who don't want to, I mean, not to like think, but like who don't access Student Wellness Center here because they want to express themselves in Spanish. They want to, or if they're from Brazil and Portuguese, they want to talk about, like, for example, I always say like mindfulness. Like we talk about mindfulness. I don't know what it's translated to in Spanish. Like that's not a word. Like I can't even like think about what mindfulness is. Like I'm like, so it's different. There's different things culturally and linguistically that are, I think, important to note, right? So it's like I always think about access and how do we think about being able to provide support to different communities who need those things, right? And particularly as we see even, Hamilton in the last couple of years, which I always like, we have, it's not perfect, but we do accept many refugees. If you look at our biggest populations in new immigrants are folks from Syria or from Central America to war-torn regions. And I'm like, are we ready to provide the supports they need? Because English is not their first language. And I think that's, I don't know. I always think about those things because I know if my parents had access to those types of services when we came here 20 years ago, I think they would have struggled less in that immigration experience. So, yeah, I'll give that. But yeah, it's just with somebody to like, I remember the things like, oh no, like I'm struggling here at work, or this person did something sassy. And then I remember my parents came here at 45 and gave up everything they had so me and my sister could get it better. So it does put in perspectives, but I think there's I think just immigrant parents, there's no way we can praise, like we can ever be thankful enough. Maybe, I don't know if you feel the same. Like I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor you, but I know it will never be enough. So it's sort of like a fun thing. Okay.
And just a message to get across, like, I don't want to make any problem sound small, like I feel like I downplay like a breakup and stuff. Like those stuff are hard. They're tough to deal with. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't want to make anything look like, oh, it's just this or just that. Because one thing I learned about problems is they're yours and, you have to deal with them. So like, I just want to get that point across as well.
Thank you so much for saying that, Simoni. I was literally just waiting for a gap from your both speaking to say something very similar. I think as an immigrant myself, and my grandparents were Tibetan refugees and had to like reestablish their life, learn a whole new language. And I think a lot of us who are immigrants and the children of immigrants, we often do that where we compare what we're going through with our parents. And we're like, well, that could never possibly be in the realm of the same level. And so we kind of invalidate our own experiences. We say, well, what I'm struggling with is not that bad. Like I shouldn't be upset. It's almost like we're saying I'm not allowed to be upset because they had it worse. Right. And I think about how that impacts our mental well-being when we're not giving ourselves permission to be sad, to be hurt, to be frustrated, to be angry, to be hurt, all those natural emotions that come up when you go through a breakup, when your boss is being difficult, when your coworkers when a friend is whatever, like, when those daily life things happen and, a betrayal happens, all of those things, those feelings are so real, but we have this mindset of, oh no, I should just be grateful that I get to be here because my parents sacrificed so much to let me come to this university, to let me come to this country, to let me have this life, right? And there's so much pressure that I find put on children of immigrants, as well as I'm sure children of any background, really, to, that comparison can be, while obviously valid and real because their experiences were so real and painful, it's so hard to hold space for our own experiences. And that's something that I continue to work on. And hopefully you are all working on it and people listening to can also work on it because it is a real struggle to learn to validate our own experiences while still holding space for our parents' experiences, which were also painful and difficult and a struggle in a different way, right? Something else Sorry, Patrick, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add because like we chatted a lot about how our like ethnic and cultural identities as men affect our perception of mental health. Dane is from the Wichita tribe in Oklahoma. Is it correct?
Mhm.
Is that correct? Awesome.
Yep, Southwest Oklahoma. Yep.
Yes, I see. And I know that that's something that you've talked a lot about in the past, and that's something that you hold very strong to your identity. So I was just wondering if the discussion that we just had can sort of be extrapolated and continued to your unique experience as an Indigenous American.
Yeah, no, it's very similar. It's just a little different. The fact of, we didn't leave somewhere. We've been here, but it's the same thing. And for me, it took me a long time to even be able to talk to anyone in the tribe about it, because just one thing that our tribe does, one of the customs we do is like, as a younger person, you don't look an older person in the eye. It's like actually like super frowned upon, and like basically like it's the equivalent of like fighting words. Like if you were to stare an elder in the eye. So when you're trying to have an honest conversation with somebody and you can't look them in the eye, it's really hard, right? So that took a little bit for me. Obviously figured out ways around it, and like basically voiced that it was uncomfortable and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same things like what Rodrigo and Simoni were talking about. Like I've always felt that too. Like, how are my problems this big? Like my grandma was taken off her reservation and they cut her hair and they told her she couldn't speak the language that she spoke. And but much like everybody said, like every problem is yours. And just because you think they never had problems or they had a lot bigger problems, a problem is still a problem, and it's an issue until you address it. And so it's very, very similar, just obviously not immigration wise, but.
I know, Dane, we previously mentioned that the pandemic was something where you had to have some shifting in jobs, like you had to really change your outlook. And I know that you got married just before the pandemic as well. So congratulations to you and your wife. But that must have been a tough time, right? Like the start of a long-term relationship like that. It can often be a vulnerable stage, especially if you throw a global pandemic right at it. So I was just wondering how that was for you.
Yeah. Well, it's been fantastic. There's never been a doubt or any second in it that, I second guess myself. It's just, we've had curveballs thrown our way that, obviously everybody in the world didn't expect. Right. So we got married in April of 2020, pretty much, I mean, not like right before it, but pretty close to right before the pandemic started, in March of March. And, it was fantastic. We moved in together and went on our honeymoon, and when we came back, we were living in like a 400 square foot apartment in Seal Beach, California, right? So like, if anybody doesn't know what square footage is, it's like your average living room size. So we were basically living in a living room, and it was just hard for me because when everything happened and the season didn't start, it got delayed, and then it got delayed again, and then it finally got canceled. I found myself in kind of like a darker spot, because to me, I was like, as a man, I just looked everybody in the eye. I looked her dad in the eye, looked her mom in the eye, and told them that, I'll provide for her no matter what it takes. Right. And in the back of my mind, I was like, that's through playing football right now at this stage of my life. It gives me a job, and it's a great job. And then it got just the rug pulled right out underneath our feet. Right. And so I didn't know what to do. I felt super vulnerable. And that's where another conversation that I had with my wife, I just basically told her, look, I don't know how to provide for you and for me, and I'm really struggling with it. And then like literally days after doing that, I got a phone call from a coach that coached me in college, and he just happened to see an article that the CFL season had been canceled for the 2020 season, and offered me a job to coach quarterbacks at the University of North Texas. So I don't know if it was just like fate aligning, or just I got super lucky that he happened to be on his phone and saw that article. But that did allow me to provide for my family for that year. But yeah, you're right. It's just when something like that happens and you're with the person that you love, and you told everybody there on that day that you were going to provide for her and take care of her, and then you can't, like, as a man, that hurt me, and it took me a little bit to get over that, but I found ways to do that.
No, thank you for sharing that experience. it can feel really hard to feel like, yeah, you're letting people down. And, the role of being a provider is so often, just handed to men, whether that's culturally or societally. And dealing with that is a real struggle. So thank you for sharing that, Dane. I'm wondering, Simoni and Rodrigo, what was the pandemic? How has that been impacting you at the start, as well as just the seemingly ongoing nature of it? How's that been for the two of you?
For me, like I said, I had my struggles and stuff, but like I just found the proper channels to help get through it. It was actually turned into be like a blessing in disguise, because like I would be places and be like, yo, I would never, ever get to be here if I was playing football. Like I got to spend so much time with my nephews. I got to go to Utah and like hang out with all three of my nieces. I was at my nephew's first birthday. I was at my dad's first birthday, like in a long time, because I've been playing football for like 10 years. And I was just in all the right places. Like I got to go to my best friend's wedding. And it's really just like it was like kind of like a blessing in disguise, like, because, you tend to look at like, yo, I'm dealt 6 figures right now and I'm not getting it. So you're looking at like the biggest negative, and, instead of just like looking at all the positives in your life, like look at all this family time you get, look at all these places you get to spend with people that you care and love. It's not always all just about work, and, that's important in life, but, work, you miss out on a lot of stuff, and you find out like that hurts your mental too. Like just missing out on so much, just, working in a different country and being away from your family, and just having that opportunity to be around my family so much. That was like something that got through it, just being around like my sisters, my brother, my nieces, my nephews, and like my mom, my dad, and all my cousins. Like I feel like they just picked me up and like carried me into the next season. Like, all right, here you go. Have like, it was, family was real big for me.
Yeah, a little bit different, I guess, because when the pandemic started, I was still a student finishing my PhD. And I will say it took maybe 2 to 3 months to get up from this rut of literally just like, there would be some days that I wouldn't do anything, right? And again, I hadn't been diagnosed at the time yet. So I think the pandemic, I live alone here in this apartment. My parents are in Milton, which is 30 minutes away. And it was at the time where, my mom had diabetes. Well, she has diabetes. So I didn't want to risk it, because at the time we still sort of didn't understand COVID too well. So I was like, oh my God, I don't want to, like, I go to the convenience store and I'm the one who brings COVID to my home. Like I just couldn't live with myself with that. So it was a bit of I think I was alone probably for like a month and a half without seeing anybody. And that's kind of where I got in my own head. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies, right? Like just me in this apartment trying to work I wasn't doing too good at it. So I think it took its toll, I would say, in my mental health at the beginning. So it would have been May 2020 to maybe July 2020. And eventually since then, sort of, seek help, found, talk to friends, be able to like be with my parents. Like I kind of, one of the things that I did choose early on was I'd rather be with my parents as my bubble rather than with friends. And I know that was, some people try to have both, but I just couldn't risk it for my mom's sake. And just being able to like also spend time somewhere, like Simoni said, like I was like, my mom's like, I don't like, she said it in a joke, like, I'm scared that if COVID ends, we won't see you again, right? Because like, what are you doing in the weekends? You're out with friends and, out and about. And, my mom would always be like, you don't spend Saturdays. And then during COVID, I was like spending the weekends with them. So it was, it's been interesting. I will say, work-wise, as working at a university, luckily we were able to pivot online. So it wasn't necessarily too much change there. But I think COVID kind of really told me things that I knew about myself. Like I'm an extrovert. I don't think I could do another 2 to 3 months just by myself in this apartment. I think I would, so I don't know. I think there's a lot that has gone through it. And I know I'm not alone. Like even so many of our students, one of the things too that I realized was having empathy. And I will say it, this is not uncommon, nor am I outing anyone, but I've never had so many emails from students where like they had family pass away, or I had students like, can we meet? But like my Wi-Fi is really spotty because I'm at that ER with my mom. I was like, don't worry about the assignment. Like worry about your mom. So I think that also was this idea of being connected to people. Like I think, and I really, like, I will call out the lack of empathy. I saw other places where like I'm really sorry. I just emailed my professor in this other course, and like they don't care that my mom died. And I was like, no, like don't worry about my course. We will figure something out. So I think there was a lot of people struggling with it. Right? We still, like, this pandemic took, like I feel like if all I got was 3 months by myself, where I was really, with, under, maybe depressed with things like, yeah. But I think there's just so many people have struggled with it, and now I think it's up to all of us to come together to move on to maybe a post-COVID world, because I also worry about all the impact that it's had.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, it's really interesting to see like our different experiences with the pandemic, and how it's affected us all. And as we shift out of it, it's more important than ever to check in with ourselves, because this is yet again another drastic change, right? And we kind of settled into what we accepted as a norm for some time, and then we're snapped right out of it. So just for those who aren't male identifying, or those who might feel as if they're doing fine right now, what did in your experiences, did you notice that the people around you, did they do anything different or special that made them seem more approachable, or made you feel more comfortable going out and speaking with them? And this is just sort of advice to people who want to be a part of that support system for the men in their lives.
Simoni, did you want to say something? I see that you've unmuted yourself.
Oh, I mean, can you repeat the question again?
Sorry, yeah.
I lost my train of thought when this video went out. I was like, yo, it disappeared on me.
All good. It's just what can people do to be a source of support for the men in their lives, or be someone that men can be vulnerable with? What can do?
for me, like, I think his question was talking about like, when did you see like something you felt comfortable going on to somebody, right? Like to talk to somebody. So for me, it was like, as like macho and like what, however I act, like being like a team captain of a bunch of macho guys and stuff. Like, I think my teammates and like my, like, that are around me, they understand when something's like not right. You know what I mean? We've all been around each other. And it's like, I would just have like certain teammates come up to me and be like, hey, yo, we going to get some lunch today. Oh, we're going to get some dinner today. Oh, we're going to, just like, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, he feels like, because you like, when you're around somebody, like, you feel like a shift, when something's wrong. Like, it's just like being human, right? Like, you can feel that the sympathy for the, oh, okay, like, this isn't just football, because a lot of times, like, I've been places where it's like, it's just football, like when you're in college or when you're in high school, everybody's like, all right, like, we're friends, but like, I'm trying to get to Division I. Or when you're Division I, you're like, I'm trying to get to the pros, and it's like, it's all business. And then when you're somewhere, like, that's why I love Hamilton so much, is because like the culture that's created here, it's like, man, yeah, we play football and the objective is to win a championship. And like, that's like most important. Like, we're about winning over here. Like, that's what we want to do. But like, we're taking care of each other in every other way possible too. Like, we're putting our neck on the line for each other. Like my freaking CEO was calling me at like, letting me know like, hey, this is good. Everything's okay. And he doesn't have to do that. The owner of the Tiger Cats hits like, gives you a shout out and stuff, like, just to let you know that they care about you and stuff. And like, that's stuff that they don't have to do. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's just, for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like checking in, and then it doesn't always have to be, let's have a conversation about your mental health. It could just be, let's go grab food. And then the conversation will kind of naturally happen there. I think that's great suggestions. Thank you, Simoni. Dane, did you want to add?
Yeah. Like, another way to say exactly what you're saying, that's kind of what I realized, like, helped me the most and I feel like it helps other people the most, is like, for so long, I think that people always thought that when you want to talk about your mental health, like, you got to come in dressed in your blazer like me and Simoni are. You got to sit down. You got to have your notes ready to to present why you feel this way. And that's not it, right? It should be just an easy conversation to have over some dinner, over some lunch, just speaking freely. Like, it's okay sometimes to even say something that might be the wrong thing, but you have to be able to voice yourself to eventually get to the right thing. And for me, it took a long time to realize, like, all right, it doesn't have to be a formal job interview where like I'm going to get interrogated to really express what's on my mind. And just like everybody's saying, like, it could be as simple as just like going and grabbing a bite to eat, or even just while you're driving in the car, while you're talking about going to get a bite to eat. So it can happen anywhere and anytime.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that I saw maybe a question up about like trust, and I do think trust is important. It does take some time to build. So, you know, if you've noticed something is wrong with someone and you're not necessarily close to that person, you know, like we're all in a community, so similar to what Simoni said, right? Like I'm sure, like not to try to like make a friend like web, but you know, some people are closer to others than you may be. So it's trying to really understand and know, like, okay, so if I have a friend who maybe I'm not as close to, but I know something's off, well, I can maybe talk to someone that they're closer to and be like, hey, have you noticed if their behavior's thing, like maybe you want to reach out, right? Like I'm just a thought. So I think being able to know and understand supports, because it's not necessarily you have to do everything, right? Like it might be better received if it comes from someone else. One of the things that I have noticed though is that more and more, without trying to be like offensive, I have found older men now are actually starting to be a little bit more open about those things, right? When we talk about, you know, in the university, like with like all our older profs, right? Like all the, like my colleagues have been teaching, let's say with the most teaching experience, right? Who've been here for decades. I do think there is starting a bit of a shift of being able, like they're also being vulnerable. So then the younger folks can be like, okay, like maybe there's some idea. So I think many of the ways that, you know, they can act as a support is be like leading by example, right? If they're in front of the room and they're the ones like quote unquote on power, then they have to be some shift, right? It has to come from the top so people know that other ways are there. But in terms of just like being able to provide support, I think it's, if you start opening, like if you speaking for yourself are able to talk about your own struggles in a group, in like a friend group or other places, then that might actually trigger someone to like come up to you, right? Like if you're just in like having brunch with friends, I don't know, and then you're like, hey man, like this week has been really tough, so you know I went through things. You never know what that might trigger in another friend. So I think if you're just being transparent and leading by example, then that might actually, some other people might be able to like bring in, right? But you have to be confident and be willing to share and open, so then other people can be in. Because I've had that sometimes. There was this professional development workshop that I went to like a while ago where I said something and literally someone like went into my inbox, can we chat? Because what you said resonated, and you know we've had this kind of conversation and stuff. So you never know what you're going to say, like even just in group friends or things that people are just willing to like hold on to and then like pull the string, or I don't know, maybe I'm just really bad with analogies, but like maybe you're fishing, you never know where you're gonna like put like bait and then someone might actually whatever. I'll stop with the analogies, but you think I think everyone knows what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think you have a great point there, Rodrigo. Analogies aside, I think, yeah, like leading by example, right? And when we're vulnerable, that gives other people permission to be vulnerable too. Because if you're doing it, then you're a safe person for me to be vulnerable with, because you're telling me what you're feeling, and then that makes it easier for me to say, yeah, I'm feeling that too, or I'm also feeling something similar, right? And I think I'm always a big proponent of like, if I want someone to be vulnerable with me, what am I doing to let them know I'm someone who can be vulnerable too, right? And who can accept that vulnerability, and how am I leading with my own vulnerability to give them permission to be vulnerable, to create that space for them to be vulnerable. So definitely leading by example and leading with vulnerability before expecting others to be vulnerable with you is a really great thing that I try to model in my life, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so yeah, leading by example, like just initially starting the conversation, these are all great things that you folks have mentioned. But just some things that people around me have done that have made me feel more comfortable with sharing when we're actually sitting in the conversation is by being more comfortable with silence. So when you ask someone who is not being used to being asked how they're feeling, they're not going to immediately, a lot of the times they might not necessarily unload and free flow like everything they're feeling on you, and there might be some silence in that conversation. And if you're someone like me that can't stop talking and has like difficulties thinking about what they're going to say and pausing, you might just move past that topic when they were actually just thinking and trying to gather their thoughts. So sitting with the discomfort of silence, and understanding that silence can breed meaningful and insightful responses that tell you a lot about a person, is something I think that we can all apply to these interactions that we hope to have to support the men in our lives. So yeah, Zeinab, do you want to move on to one of our last questions before we open it up for the audience Q&A?
Yes. No, actually, I think I'm going to leave that one for the very end. I think I'll jump into the Q&A now, actually.
Okay, sounds good.
That's okay. So we have some questions that have come in from the Q&A. Dane's already been on it in the chat. He's answering, but I'm still going to bring it to the larger group so that we can just have everyone hear it and give other people a chance to comment as well. So one of the questions that we got was something that I know that I spend a lot of my time reflecting on as well. Is I'm going to copy it into the chat for our panelists so that you can see it. But it says, so I know this is something that I personally need to work on, but I was wondering if any of you have any suggestions on dealing with having to hear about how terrible men are in today's world and how to not let that get on your nerves. I totally get that there are some terrible men out there, but it always frustrates me how acceptable it currently is for people to constantly complain about men as a whole. And I know that as a queer woman myself, I hear this a lot in like communities, and there's a lot of trauma there that people have experienced, and it leads to some broad generalizations about men that different people have different feelings about. So yeah, just curious, how do you all feel about that, and how do you respond to that in your lives?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I did not know the Q&A was like going to be answered here. So this is fantastic. That's why I answered the questions. Now I can try to talk about it because I'm a terrible typer. But yeah, I agree. Like it's hard to hear that all the time, and just hear about how bad men are and like this is bad, he's bad, yada yada. Because like in the back of your mind, you're trying to be good, right? So if you're just being berated all the time with how bad you are, it's going to be tough to just stay mentally strong through it. But I mean, I think really what I was trying to say when I typed that, and it was hard to like say, was that like with all the stuff that is bad in the world, especially for men, like that, to me, that just leaves so much more room for opportunity for good things to come from it. Like not necessarily each situation, but like just if there's so much bad stuff going on, that it's just hopeful that you could be the spark for hope. Like you could really help somebody with something. And I think obviously a lot of like news outlets and stuff like that don't really highlight that. But I think if you know where to look for like good news and like are constantly trying to do good things, it's eventually going to come to the light.
Yeah, I can add something. I mean, I appreciate whoever asked the question about, it's something that they need to work on, because I think I always find like if it's not you, like if it's not talking about you, if you're leading a good principled life and you're out there doing good and no harm, why does it bother you? Right? Like why does it bother you? Because, and particularly through COVID, we cannot shy away from the truth. Every 6 days, a woman is murdered by their partner in Canada. So that's a family that's impacted. We see murder and missing Indigenous women here. Like those are the things that we need to be aware of, right? Like you cannot hide with those numbers. If you yourself are leading a good principled life, if you're out there supporting women, if you're there trying to break the barriers, then you don't have anything to worry about, because they're not talking about you. Right? Like they're not talking about you. So I always think about that, like of trying to, like, yeah, I get it. Like, everyone likes to make jokes. We always generalize. Sometimes, we generalize things that we shouldn't and whatever. But like, even like obvious, like, very specific. I did geology in my PhD, so we always say like geologists just like beer, and I like things that we just generalize about scientists or anything. But if you're thinking about what, like, but those are happening. That's literally happening all the time, every 6 days, and it's hard to think about. And that's just Canada, let alone the world. So if you're a man who's doing things the right way, that that joke, that comment is not about you. So but it's talking about the realities that women face in this country and the rest of the world. So I think you cannot phase away from those. Every 6th day, a mom loses their daughter, and that's just the reality. So or loses a sister, an aunt, whatever. And I think that's kind of where I get grounded on. Of we need to stop this, and what am I doing? And if I'm not there out doing harm, then I don't like. I'm not going to be offended. Like, I don't care, because maybe that person who made the comment lost someone or has experienced things that you don't know. So maybe there's a reason why they brought that up. So I think, I think it's just being aware, educating yourself as to maybe why they're saying that. Right. And again, if you are not contributing to the problem, they're not speaking about you.
Yeah. I think you bring up so many great points there, Rodrigo. Absolutely. I think something that I try to ground myself is when people are making generalizations like that, and I'm just like, where are they coming from, right? And in this instance, it's usually coming from a place of pain or trauma or having experienced violence or knowing someone who's experienced violence, and this point of frustration or exasperation or even desperation, and just to feel seen and validated, right? And so I'm kind of trying to recognize where are people coming from when they're making these statements about men, and kind of trying to empathize with the pain that has prompted that statement. And like you said, recognizing that it's not about you as an individual. I think that's a really great thing to bring up. Thank you. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add for that question before we move on to the next Q&A piece? All right. Perfect.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Rodrigo, like, just to build on to what you said, but that doesn't mean that you aren't deserving of support, that you aren't worthy of getting help just because you identify as a man. That doesn't make you any tougher or any more resilient to certain things. Just because someone paints you as a terrible man. So I think that's also an important thing to bring up. But yeah, Zeinab, if you want to ask the next question.
Absolutely. And I think we're never stuck with where we are, right? Even if you are a man who has caused harm or violence or whatever, right? It's literally never too late to be like, okay, this is something that I've done. I don't want to continue doing this. How can I get support and tools and, change and grow, right? Because we're all constantly growing. So thank you for bringing that point up as well. So the next question, it's a bit more specific to athletes, because I think we have a lot of athletes in our audience, but it can also be broadened to Rodrigo as well, because I think it's pretty relevant. So one of the questions is, how do you handle the stress of pre-game day jitters, which could also translate to like before a big presentation or something else, if Rodrigo, you want to speak to that. But how do you handle like the performance anxiety and the showtime jitters?
For me, it's all about routine, right? So like whatever you're used to doing, and like, and put yourself in the space of doing it, like it gets easier. Like you'll still have the jitters, but I know that in our organization, we're big on playing the game before the game actually happens. We have a day called game day where we come out there and, I know this day, it's like, all right, I know all the plays that are about to happen. I know everything that's about to happen. Let's aim for perfect today. Let's do something. Let's play this game like it's really going to happen. Like adversity happens. What am I going to do when adversity hits? All right, I'm going to get through it and everything's going to be fine. And then game day comes. It's like, oh, how are you played the game? I still got the little jitters, but I just have Dane headbutt me really quick and then it's all gone. So like, I mean, the way I handle it is just making sure I'm prepared. Like every time I'm really prepared, I have no worries in the world. That's when I'm talking the most crap there. I'm like, yeah, let's get it. Like, you know what I mean? Because I'm not nervous, because my preparation feels like it leads to excellence. And like, anytime I'm getting like too nervous before games, it's usually because I'm like, man, I should have flipped one more page, or I should have did one thing, like, you know. And I think like if you prepare to a level of excellence, then that helps with the jitters, just being prepared. And I think like just going in to take a test as well, you know, just like if you're prepared, you're going to that test like, but you know, so that's me.
Yeah, no, Simoni's exactly right. Like that's in our team, our organization, we always talk about that. Like we always compare it to taking a test, because everybody's done that at some point in their life. Like, you know, when you've studied for that test and you've read every index card and you know it inside and out, like you could get up there and teach it. Simoni's right. Like you just sit down, take the test, walk out of there, and you're like, I just killed that. Like I don't even need to see what my grade was. I know. But the flip side of that is when you're not prepared and you're sitting around and you're seeing who you can sit next to in the testing room. Like maybe you could see over that shoulder. Maybe I could do this. Like that's because you're not prepared. And so we always try to get like over prepared. That way you can just be free and relax and have fun. And for me personally, one thing I try to do is like, one quote that our head coach has always told me is that like pressure is a privilege. Like you're so lucky that you get to have that pressure. Like a lot of people in this world will never experience like the pressure of sitting in a quiet locker room before you run out to 70,000 fans, right? Like it's going to be super loud as soon as you run through the tunnel, but sitting in that locker room, I mean, you could hear a pin drop. And it's just like, you just got to remember how fortunate you are and how lucky you are that like we're grown men playing a game that kindergartners still play, you know? So for me, I just try to be extremely thankful in that moment. And then just like Simoni said, go out and just have fun and just do what you're put here to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Rodrigo, did you want to add anything? We talked about test anxiety a little bit in there as well.
Well,
Any thoughts as a prof?
Not well. The only thing I would say is like when it comes like jitters or anything, like if you get nervous before doing it, I think it's also a good reminder that it's because you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't have those things. So I think it's just a nice reminder that you're human, that there's something that it's worth doing, but it's also, yeah, there's preparedness, there's all those things, but also even if things don't go okay, I think there's also that preparation. Like if it doesn't, it's okay. You can't predict life. You did it, and sometimes things just don't go in your favor, or there are things that are outside of your control. So I think being able to like also cope with that after something occurs, it's good. But yeah, if you get jitters, I always say it's because you care. You're nervous because you care.
I love that. If you're nervous, it's because you care. I say that to my friends all the time too. And something else that I want to build on is that notion of there will be times when it doesn't go well, when you lose the game or fail the test or whatever the situation may be, and trusting that you can handle that situation too. Like you can get through that and be okay on the other side of that that experience, right? And that like so-called failure that we all dread so much, right? Like being prepared to do your best, but also being prepared to handle a loss, right? And knowing that I'll be okay. I won't feel good. I won't love it, but I will be okay, even if that's the outcome, right? I think that can really help. So the next question, it's a similar theme around athletics. So when you're within a game after a bad play, what do you tell yourself to move on and kind of move forward with the game? It's much easier said than done. What tools do you try to apply?
Well, for me during games, I go into like this godly form where it's like anything that happens is just what happens. Like I'm like already like, I feel like I'm touching the sky already. So if I miss a tackle, I get up and I'm like, that's not normal. I'm not tripping about it. You know what I mean? Just because you got to put yourself and think like super highly of yourself. Like any mistake you make, you got to just don't make the same mistakes. And like when you make a mistake, you got to be like, that's a one-off. You know, you can't drown yourself in mistakes. Like if when I miss a tackle or drop an interception, I'm like, man, I would have probably scored on that. And just keep your mind in a positive light. Don't fall for the trap where it's like, man, I call it like feeling sorry for yourself, especially like in an athletic level. Like there's really no time for that. You know, you got all practice all week to like, oh man, crap. You know, we got like anytime somebody drops a pick, you're not allowed to slap your hands, you know what I mean? Just because it's like, oh man, you're putting like bad, what's the word I'm looking for? You're just like standards in your head, right? Or rituals even, right? And it's just like, I watched Dane, like, I think he's so cold at it where like, he'll have like a bad series, like it won't go his way, but then he comes out the next series and drops a bomb and like, oh crap, it's like, yeah, it's like that fast. Everything happens that fast. And as bad as you think it's going because you missed up on a play, just remember there's so many more opportunities in the game to erase all of it too. So like, just take advantage of all your opportunities you have. Don't drown in like the plays that don't matter anymore, because it's the same thing. Just got to keep moving forward, moving forward.
Yeah, and to like kind of echo onto that, like in the athletic realm, like I kind of picked something up from when I used to play baseball as a kid. And it was like in baseball, every time you step out of the batter's box, I would always look at the top of my bat, because that's something that's constant and the same. And no matter if it's wet or cold or windy or rainy, like the end of the bat is always going to be there. So that would kind of like ground me like back in. And no matter if I just hit a home run or struck out, like that bat is not going anywhere. And that's how like I try to like, so for football, for me, I always look at the crossbar. Like on every field, there's always a crossbar, no matter what the stage is. So like Simoni said, whether you had a great series and you went out and scored a touchdown, or you went out and threw an interception, like there's always opportunity to go back. And what pulls me back into that place is the crossbar. And that's kind of like my tool to like cope with it during the game, is like find something that no matter what is always going to be there. And then that kind of puts you back into that routine. That for me, athletically, that's what I do.
Exactly. And just to add more to it, it's like, don't be afraid neither. Like, don't be afraid to make a mistake. I see so many players that are really good football players and really good athletes, but they're so scared to make that mistake that they don't ever challenge themselves at that level of what they can possibly be, because they're like, oh, I'm going to be safe. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But like, I feel like, especially in this culture, it's like, don't be afraid. We're not scared to make mistakes. Like I'm running, I'm like, I don't care who this person is. I'm going to stick up. Like if he catches it, it's luck. If, I pick it off, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's like, you have to be like fearless out there, because it's a game of mistakes. That's all football is, like everybody's trying to make somebody make a mistake, whether it's in athletics or, and I feel like as long as you're aware that, you're allowed to make mistakes, that also heightens your level of play too, because the guys playing it safe can't reach that level. They might have an average game, but they can't have that game, you know what I mean, from the people that are not scared to make the mistakes and make the tough throws or the tough tackles,
Yeah, I think those are all such excellent points of one, like grounding is something that I really heard, right? So like when you are stressed or anxious or starting to feel, really down on yourself and that like mental spiral is happening, what can ground you and like feel like, yeah, this is 100%, this is real, this is where I am right now, bring your mind back to the present, as opposed to being in a million different places of what you should have done and could have done, right? Like find that for yourself. What is it that grounds you, right? It looks different for everyone else. It could be the end of the bat, the crossbar, whatever that is, but like it could be a breathing exercise, it could be counting down from, it could be whatever, right? But like something that brings you back to the present moment, I think is so key. And what you said, Simoni, about not being afraid to make mistakes, I think there's so much perfectionism just in everywhere, in school, in athletics, in everything. This like, and I think I've always assumed perfectionism is like, oh, I'm like someone with a lot of to-do lists and someone who like does everything in like a very particular way. But what I'm learning is perfectionism is also the fear of failure, the fear of doing something imperfectly, so much so that it like paralyzes you or it makes you stuck, right? So that's also a thing. Like, be okay with making mistakes. You said, a game is full of mistakes, like life is full of mistakes, and that's okay. That's how we learn. That's how we get better. That's how we get more confident, is through making mistakes and then realizing how to do things better, right? And that's something that I definitely wanted to build on and add to. Rodrigo, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to add on this? If not, that's cool too.
No, I mean, it's just like, I think we all, like you just said it, you like for the most successful people, you don't know the number of failures that they had, right? And I think that's something that I think maybe people could work on, that people like, if you're in a place where people look up to you, maybe you can just tell them. Like I always tell my students, I got like a 34 in my first linear algebra midterm, and I still was able to get a PhD, right? Like that 34% didn't stick with me for my whole life, right? People think if it's just one mistake, it's going to define your life. And I think it's not, everyone makes a mistake. We all do it all the time, right? We make plenty of mistakes. And it's just like, and there's a lot of things that you could go online and go, it's like, mistakes are the most important lessons that you're going to learn, right? Rather than like the wins. You don't learn anything from the wins because they're just nothing to learn. You did it right. So I think just knowing that in life you're going to have so many failures, but that are going to make you the successful person that you need to be. That's it.
Absolutely. Our mistakes make us, right? And they force us to grow, and they help us grow, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I think those are sort of the main questions. There was a few more in the Q&A that got addressed, but we've already talked about a lot of those pieces. So in our last couple of minutes, I want to just ask you all, just to share, do you have any advice for men in our audience or who might see this later who don't know how to be vulnerable and who want to try, or who don't know where to start or are just like scared or whatever that feeling might be? Give any advice for men hearing this?
So for all the fellas, my advice would just be like, look around your life and look around your circle and think about who you care about and who cares about you, and just realize that, like, would you be able to talk to yourself about anything, and then ask yourself that question, and then you'll get your response on like the people around you, like I'd be like, if my sister could come to me with anything. So I'm like, I talk to my sister about a lot of stuff, just because I'm like, we have that relationship. So just start with your small friend, your family group or friend group, and like, it's just such a load off. And another main thing was like, your friends are your friends. So don't just be putting like all your trauma on them and stuff. Like, there's professional help, like you could talk to therapists, you could talk to doctors and stuff like that, because like at the end of the day, we don't know what's going on. Like, we're not professionals at this stuff. You know what I mean? So like, I'm like talking to my sister and she's like, she's a professional dancer, you know what I mean? But like, it helps, but like, she's not able to give me the advice that my doctor would, or my psychologist or my therapist would be able to give me. So, make sure you seek that professional help. Don't just think like your friends are there to like offload on you. Just make sure you use your channels so you can better your mental as well.
Yeah. And then along with that, I would say that like feeling like you don't know how to start the conversation, or you don't know like what the next step is, like that is completely normal. And everybody that is at like the state that you want to reach one day was where you were, right? Like you got to be a beginner at some point and just push through that like uncomfortability. Like, I don't know what to say. Like what Patrick was saying earlier, like silence is okay sometimes. Like, as long as you're like trying to get the ball rolling, like eventually it's going to pick up steam, and the right things will come out of your mouth. And like, you got to start somewhere. If you never start, it will never just magically be fixed. So don't let the fear of like being scared of not knowing what to say or what to do, like stop you. Just find someone, like Simoni was saying, that you love and that you trust, and just start the conversation there.
Yeah, I'll just add, everything that's been said so far. I completely agree on, but sorry, I'll just go with this money. Like I always say with that, whenever I talk to friends, I'm like the caveat, I'm not a like professional help. So I always encourage folks to go through it, because I think that's kind of, there's a difference between advice, and it can get very dangerous, right? If people take everything you say as, medical advice. But for me, I always say like, there's nothing that you have to lose if you talk to someone. Worst comes to worst, things will just stay the same, which is not the ideal, but the greatest thing that could actually happen if you do talk to someone and open up is that you can like take the first step to changing things to the way that you want them to be, right? So it's like, there's nothing to lose by opening up, right? Like if you actually, because then you're going to see the changes that you want. And then the second part would be, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. I would just say, never mind. I completely went. There was a bird that just flew by and like, just kind of, yeah. But yeah, you can. No change will happen unless you take the first step, right? So that's it.
That is exactly how my brain works. I've been trying so hard to make sure I'm staring at the computer, because something out the window is just going to take me off the panel entirely. Thank you all for sharing. I think that's such great advice of you have to start somewhere. And I like to tell people, like, you have to risk judgment and rejection in order to have connection, right? Got to risk it for the biscuit, whatever you want to say. And it isn't fun, right? So I like to tell people, like, what's a tolerable risk that you think you can handle, right? You don't have to start with your deepest, darkest traumas that you're, like, start with something easy and start with the safest people you can find, and then flex that muscle, right? Just like any other muscle, the more you use it, the easier it gets, the more natural it feels, the stronger you become. So like the more you practice vulnerability, practice reaching out, it's going to be awkward as heck at first. I'm not going to underplay it. It won't feel fun. But I mean, not always. Sometimes it does. Like, hopefully, if they respond well, it does feel better. But like the doing of it sometimes does feel really difficult. And so, what level of discomfort can you handle? And then your ability to handle it will increase over time, right? I remember the first thing I did was I used to journal, and I just wrote a bunch of stuff and I stuck it under my roommate's door with a note that said, "Please read this. Don't talk to me about it, but like just know what's on my mind," right? And that's how I started. So we do what we do to start, and then we go from there. So thank you all for the wonderful, wonderful feedback and the wonderful, wonderful conversation that we've had so far today. It's been awesome just for me to participate. We really appreciate your time. And so Madison has jumped back off, and I'll tie it back to her to close us up.
Thank you so much, Zeinab. I'm just going to reiterate exactly what Zeinab was on her way to saying. We really appreciate all three of you agreeing to be a part of this panel today. It's such an incredibly important topic, and you all have such incredible perspectives to share with our audience. So we really, really appreciate you agreeing to be a part of this panel today. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in for this live panel and for asking all of your questions in the Q&A function. Thank you to Dane for typing out a lot of those answers. Like I said, this call has been recorded, so we will be posting this eventually in some format. But again, thank you so much for being here today, and we hope that you have a very enjoyable rest of your weekend.